So today we're starting point slope form, and our learning goal is that I can write equations of lines in point slope form. So we have already learned slope intercept, we have learned standard form, and now we are going to talk about point slope. So before we get started, I want you to complete the warm-up if you haven't already done so. And when you are done, I want you to check your answers with mine so you can submit it using the Edpuzzle. All right, go ahead. So you can see from my work that the friend used the x-intercept, so they used this point in the equation instead of the y-intercept. So they got the slope right, which was 1/2, but what they didn't do was look at the correct y-intercept, which should have been -2. So the equation should have been y equals 1/2 x minus 2. For the next one, for our warm-up, we needed to find the slope, so we did 4 minus 2 over 6 minus 0, and we got 2 over 6, which is 1/3. And then in our they gave us the y-intercept, and so our equation is y equals 1/3 x plus 2. So down here we had to subtract our x's and bring them to the other side, so that gave us y equals negative 4x plus 1, because we can't combine something with an x to something without an x. I subtracted the x's on number 2, and I got negative y equals negative x plus 1/5. Then we have to divide by a -1 on both sides because we can't have a negative y, and that gave us the answer of y equals x minus 1/5, and that's because it just changed the signs of everything inside the equation. On number 3, we added 2/3 x to both sides because it was negative, and we got 2y equals 2/3 x minus 7. We had to divide by -2 to get y by itself. And so here's my work for that. And so when we divide, we had to multiply by the flipped fraction. And so that cancels out our denominator. And then I cross simplified and I got 1/3. And so y equals 1/3 x minus 7/2. You can change that if you want. You do not have to. You can keep it as a fraction. We don't mind fractions in this topic. All right, so moving on, we are writing equations using point slope. And so point slope is a linear equation written in the form y minus y1 equals our slope, which is m, times x minus x1. And this is a line that passes through the point x1, y1, and the slope is still m. And right now that makes 0 sense, but it's okay. We will get into that here in a second. So write an equation in point slope form of the line that passes through the point -6, 1 with a slope of 2/3. So here's what we do. We need to use our equation. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And so what's nice about point slope is all we need is a point and then our slope, and we can write an entire equation. So we are going to label our point. So our point x1 is -6 and y1 is 1. And so we have y minus our y1, which was just 1, equals our slope times our x minus x1, which was -6. And when we have a -6, that turns into a plus because two negatives next to each other give us a positive. And what's really awesome about this one is that's just our answer. We don't have to do anything else. You just leave it in this form. That's it. Call it a day. So I want you to pause the video and try the try-its, which are 1 through 3, and then check your answer with mine. All right, so the first thing I did was label my points. And so I labeled my x1 and my y1. And then I rewrote the equation that I knew that I was going to have to plug into and what point slope is. And so that way all I had to do was see what numbers had to change. And so it made it really easy to plug them in. So we get y minus 2 equals -4 x minus 1. And then the second one, same thing. I labeled my points. Always label them, or else sometimes with point slope form we kind of confuse our x and our y and we get them in the wrong place, and that can actually really mess up our answer. So when I plugged in my y1, I got 0 here, and then my slope was 1, and then x minus 7. And so I want you to simplify it. And when you do that, we don't have to add the 0, and we don't have to put a 1. And so it ends up looking like slope-intercept form, and that's totally okay because our slope is just 1 and our point was our point had a 0 in it, and so it's okay. It actually turns out that our y-intercept is 7, 0, and so that makes sense because it goes down 1 over 1 each time. For the third one, when you plug it in, you get minus a negative 5, and that turns to plus, and then you get minus a negative 8, and so that turns to a plus as well. And so we end up with y plus 5 equals negative 3/4 times x plus 8. All right, so our next part is writing an equation using 2 points into point intercept form. So we're going back to what we just learned in 13.6, which is writing in point intercept form. However, we do not have the y-intercept. So now I've labeled my points as x1, y1, x2, y2, and you could have used any of the points. I just chose the first two, and we need to find our slope. So first thing we're going to do is m x2 minus, our y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so we're going to plug in those points. So my slope, I chose 4 for my y2 minus 10 over 2 minus negative 1, which turns out to an addition sign. So we have 4 minus 10 is negative 6 over 3, and I get negative 2 for my slope. So now what's really cool is we don't actually need to find our y-intercept. We're going to use point slope to help us do that. So our point slope is y minus y2 equals m times x minus x2, my dog. Okay, so now I'm going to plug in my slope and I'm going to plug in a point. So I have y minus, and I'm just going to use the first point. You can use any one of them and you'll get the exact same answer. And so we have our y was 10. Sorry, I labeled those 2's. It should have been 1's. Anyway, so y minus 10 equals our slope of negative 2 times x minus, which turns to minus negative 1 is plus 1. And now we're going to distribute the negative 2 through the parentheses. So now I have y minus 10, because I haven't touched that side of my equation. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times positive 1 is negative 2. And now I'm going to add 10 to both sides. We do it to both sides of the equation. The tricky part is you need to make sure that you add it to the thing without the x, because 10 doesn't have an x. So now these are canceled, and we have y equals negative 2x plus 8. So here is my slope-intercept form, 8 being my y-intercept, and negative 2 is still my slope, which we decided it was based on our table. And so we know that we got this one correct. So I want you to do the next two on your own. Go ahead. Okay, so for the first one, I labeled my x and my y's for my x1 and my y1 and my x2 and y2, and I found the slope, and my slope was negative 1. And then I plugged in to the equation for point slope, and I got y minus y1, or y minus 1 equals negative 1 times x plus 2. Like I said, you can use either one of these points. I just chose the first one. You can do any one and you'll get the exact same answer no matter what. And so when I solved, I ended up getting, well, you have to add 1 to both sides, and then you get y equals negative x minus 1. For number 2, or I guess number 5, I labeled the first 2 points. Like I said, you didn't have to, you can use any of the 3 and you'll get the same answer, but you get y minus 5 equals negative 1 times x plus 5. And then we have to add 5 to both sides to get y by itself, and we get y equals negative x. And so both of these are our y-intercept forms. This one, our y-intercept is 0, and so we don't have to write that there. Over here, our y-intercept is negative 1. So moving on to the last problem, this is our real life problem. You finish parasailing and are being pulled back to the boat. After 2 seconds, you are 25 feet above the boat. At what height are you parasailing? First, we need to find our slope because we need m. And so our m is located in our picture. And this is 10 feet per second. And so we have a slope of negative 10. We're going down and being pulled towards the boat, and since we're going down 10 feet per second, our slope is negative because we're going towards the boat, not up in the air. And so we know our slope, and our point, we go 2 seconds. So after 2 seconds, we are 25 feet above the boat. And so now we can plug that into our point slope form. Oops, should be an M. And so our x and our y is given to us. And so we're going to plug that in. Oops, you'll see that I've already made my mistake. It's not 2 for my y1, it was 25. And then 2 is my x. It said, at what height were you parasailing? They want to know our y-intercept. Because that would be the highest that we were at, since that would be our height, and then we're being pulled downwards. And so since we're being pulled downwards, our height's shrinking, so our highest point would be our y-intercept. So we're going to solve for y-intercept. So I am going to distribute that negative 10 through the parentheses. And now I'm going to add 25 to both sides to get y by itself. So now I have y equals negative 10x plus 45. And so this is my slope, so this is how much I was moving downwards per second, but what I care about is the 45, because this tells me that I was at a height of 45, and so that's my y-intercept. And so at what point was I, or at what height was I parasailing? I was 45 feet in the air, and then after that I got pulled downwards. So my answer is 45 feet.